Everyone. So is everyone in the room here for the public speaking workshop or,
Yes.
going to at least casually listen in? Fantastic. Oh, I don't know what happened there. My name's Ruth Silverman. I work at the Student Learning Commons. I've been there about 17 years. I also teach in the Back on Track program. So presenting is a huge part of my job. And let me tell you, I had decades of my life where I was terrified about speaking in public, and now it's my bread and butter, right? So that's normal. It can improve with practice. With me, it was a traumatic experience when I was 13 years old, speaking in front of a school assembly and barely able to talk. And then it just sort of set me up for even when I was in my 30s, I was starting my master's as a mature student. And I had a presentation in my first class and like I wrote everything out. I tried to memorize it. My slides had like everything I wanted to say. And I was like, oh. And the thing that sort of started to make it better was that I took a TA-ship because I needed the money, even though I was terrified. And it was the sort of class where they didn't have to go to the tutorial. So the people who went to the tutorial really wanted to know what I had to say. And they were very supportive. And, and it was like, wait a minute, there can be nice audiences, and it just built from there. My confidence increased and increased and increased with practice. And I realized that with the right audience, I can really like it. So, if you're anxious, doesn't mean you necessarily always have to be anxious, right? There's more anxious, anxiety-provoking presentations, such as the pressure of having to present on presenting. And then, there's less. And I'm hoping that in this space, it'll be a safe space for everyone because we will be doing some practice. Everybody is here because you want to build your skills, and hopefully you'll all support each other in building your skills. So I wanted to acknowledge that we are on unceded, ancestral, and rightful Coast Salish land here, the land of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam. So this is a very bare bones agenda. Didn't break down all the different tips that we're going to be talking about. But I set the timer because in about 32 minutes, we want to get to the practice time. I'm hoping the practice time will be fairly low stakes, not terribly anxiety provoking. We'll mix, put you in pairs and you can just practice with each other. And then if somebody wants to have experience practicing in front of the group, then they can and receiving, overall feedback, but I'm not going to pressure anybody to do that. Okay, so speaking of anxiety, it really, can be the number one phobia. At least this is probably a survey from the 90s, but I would imagine probably not a whole lot has changed. Which means that if you're comfortable speaking publicly and you're reasonably good at it, there could be, a niche for you, right? Like you might be someone whose skills are in demand. You don't even have to be perfect, but just like not be afraid, right? And this is called public speaking for your courses and beyond, because you might be here because you have a presentation coming up in a class. But, even if you don't, most jobs will have at least some component of public speaking. So like even if your job is you alone working from home on a computer, there may be some time where you are going to a conference or something and you might be speaking in public, or even a meeting where you're asked to prepare something. So anxiety. Okay, first, actually, I was going to ask this before. How many people do have presentations coming up this term? Matthew. Oh, and the rest of you, are you like preparing for if you have them in the future, basically, or learn? Yeah. Okay, and can I ask like what class the presentation's in and what it's, generally what it's like?
It's for humanities.
Mhm.
Yeah, tons of presentations and humanities courses. Yeah.
Hey, yeah. Thanks. So what can you do if you're anxious about presenting? A lot of it is physiological and it's science-based, yay, because we're in science space. So it involves the nervous system being activated, and it's like an evolutionary perspective where, in the past, maybe we were going to be attacked by a tiger or something. And there's that whole fight and flight response with adrenaline kicking in and all that. And we don't know that we're not going to be attacked by a tiger and we're not like in peril of death if we're doing something that we're uncomfortable with, like public speaking. But sometimes like a big common physical symptom is your heart is pounding, your breath is like hyperventilating, or you can't breathe. So breath control is a really big part of it all. And Maisie, who's an advisor here, she's currently on maternity leave. I've presented with her many times. And she always would say that if you breathe in and then you breathe out a little bit longer than you breathe in, say breathing in for 4, breathing out for 8, then it does something physiologically where you have to calm down. Sorry, no science background here. But just in general, that's what it is. So working on breath control. And the thing about breath control is that if you've never practiced it and you're just trying to control your breath in the moment, or maybe having a few breaths right before, it's not as effective as if it's something you practice on a regular basis. So let us do a little bit, and just to show you that even a minute of this can be helpful. So please play along with me. And Neela, can you run the video? I think you can just click on it. I think it's embedded.
I ordered 200 hand-forged knives to my dorm room and built a Wix website to sell them.
Down.
I'm Noah Rosen, founder and owner of Forged to Table Knives.
Might be on mute.
Starting as a dishwasher and working my way up through
No.
These instructions guide you through a 1-minute mindfulness meditation practice to be done anytime, any place. Begin by becoming aware of your body in this moment and the sensations of your body touching a chair or the ground. Now guiding your awareness to your breath. Breathing in, rest with the sensation of the in-breath. Breathing out, rest with the sensation of the out-breath. Breathing in, breathing out. Meeting your experience with acceptance, friendliness, and curiosity. If a thought arises, simply note thinking and return your attention to your breath. Breathing in, breathing out.
Okay, I'm actually feeling more grounded. Is anyone else feeling more grounded? A lot of nods. That's fantastic. That's great. So you will, if you're registered or if you give Neela your email afterwards, you will get a package of resources. This breathing video is in your package of resources. It's just 1 minute. I think some people think, oh, I can't have a meditation practice. I have no time. This is 1 minute, but if you do it every day, then it's going to help you. And so many YouTube videos for various durations. There's also one that I'm going to be sending out, which is a 5-minute meditation, and it's specifically for visualizing a successful presentation and can be useful. Visualization is a useful technique for managing anxiety and building skills. The other thing is the more you present, the better off you're going to be. And that certainly is what happened with me. I just became, so much more comfortable the more I did it. And the more I did it in a supportive environment, obviously. So, maybe, you don't have a job like I do where you have to be presenting all the time. Maybe you just have one presentation scheduled in the term. Where do you get that practice? And I'm going to bring Matthew up to tell you where you can get that practice, one of the options, or you can do it from there.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'll probably about there.
Yeah, whatever you want.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew. So I'm from the Burnaby Mountain Toastmasters Club. It's a public speaking club here on campus. It's associated with Toastmasters International, which is a bigger organization all over the world that helps people to learn how to public speak. One of the best ways to get better at public speaking is through repetitive practice. You just go into low stakes situations where you feel safe and you just kind of have fun with a group of people. It doesn't really matter. It's not worth marks or anything like that. And we meet once a week. It's literally just over here in one of the lecture halls. And it's 6:30 p.m. on Wednesdays. Next week, I just wanted to let you guys know we have an event, a 3-minute thesis type of event. If you want to participate, you don't have to submit a slide, but it's, you can talk about literally anything. Anything that you're interested in, you can submit a slide, come up and talk about it for 2 to 4.5 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that. And we'll be really happy to get to know all of you. Look at the floor back to brief.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and also in the email package you're going to get is the link for the Toastmasters Club here at SFU. If you'd rather go to Toastmasters clubs in your neighborhood, just Google Toastmasters and you'll be able to find them all over the place. Not working. Could you advance it, please?
These instructions
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to get other people's perspectives for a couple of minutes about what makes a good presentation. And first you can read the cartoon. I'm going to suggest that probably wasn't a good presentation. So what is? You can think about, you've all been to lectures. That's a type of presentation. You can think of other ones you've been to. Some have been good, some have not been so good. What sets the good ones apart?
Well,
Matthew.
Going based off of the example from the cartoon, an appropriate length. So
Appropriate length, yeah.
How long it's going to last, and then it fits with how much.
Yeah. Another point I'm going to make is staying within your time frame, which I'm madly struggling to do right now. But sometimes people know they have like this much content, they have this much time frame. Their solution is to speak really, really fast, and that doesn't really benefit anybody.
Speaking loudly and clearly so that everyone can kind of hear.
Absolutely, yeah. Appropriate volume. You don't want to be yelling at people though. Yeah.
Also, I think having enough breath in your lungs, then speaking abdominally actually helps a lot to convey your ideas and to project to the audience.
Yay! You also agree with me about breath and how important it is. Yeah, and I sing in a choir, right? So it's a little bit similar to singing as well. Yeah. One more. Yes.
Knowing the content of your presentation, so you're not reading off the slides or having a whole bunch of text and just letting people read it. So
Yeah. Kind of the opposite of that. Yeah. So just having some basic familiarity with what you're talking about. Perfect. All right, so we will talk a little bit more about, we've addressed this, breath, pacing, volume, and you want to speak loud enough, clearly enough. I think the other thing is varying the intonation of your voice ideally, because we've all had professors who are like, and you fall asleep at the 8:30 lecture, right? So there's some of that as well. I think a threat to that is anxiety, right? Because anxiety, like, not only does it shorten your breath, but and I think some of this happened when I was 13, when I first started speaking, I was like super quiet. So anxiety can make you super quiet. It can make you speak too fast. It can make you too high pitched. There's, all sorts of things like that, maybe like, that you need to project your voice and have an appropriate volume and pacing, but the anxiety interferes, right? So that's another reason why you do the breath work, as you so, so appropriately mentioned. Absolutely. So practice, I have a slide about practice, but practice comes into almost all of the other slides. So it's important to, practice for the kind of volume and pacing and everything that you want. Maybe get some feedback about it. If you're really self-conscious, start by practicing in front of a mirror or something like that. Then get maybe somebody that you can trust to give you feedback. Maybe you're practicing in your living room and it's not nearly as big a room, but try to project your voice as if it was in a classroom, or whatever setting that you're going to be presenting in, and get feedback from the listener about it. If you can, even presenting in the same space, practicing in the same space that you're going to be presenting is ideal. Not always possible, but, maybe walk by that classroom sometimes and it's empty at certain times, and you can go in and, just kind of get the feel. Like, that can also decrease the anxiety, as I already have had the feel of standing at the front of, whatever room it is, which I'll be doing. All right. Another thing is body language. And body language can actually build your confidence, or at least project confidence, even if you're not feeling it. So I've got like a fairly open stance, and fairly upright. I think that is sort of a good projection of confidence. Open stance, like, it looks better than if somebody is like this. If you're just sort of sitting there with your arms crossed, it looks like you're protecting yourself. So maybe that's not what it means. Maybe it means you're cold or something, but that's the message you're sending to the viewers. I used to do presentations in my classroom and Back on Track, and people would literally hide. There was a podium in the corner, and people would like wear, a big hoodie or something, baseball cap, and they'd be standing there in the corner like this the whole time, and I would try to encourage them, like, not to. And this is why having something like this is very useful. If you have it, it gives you the opportunity to move around, step away from being behind the computer. And then there's also gestures. Some people talk with their hands, some people don't talk with their hands. I think a lot of people wonder, what should I do with my hands? So I'd say, maybe just keeping them by your side, maybe having one on your hip. This is a power pose. It also looks maybe intimidating if I was presenting the whole time like this. But one of the videos I'm going to be sharing in the email is Amy Cuddy. It's kind of a classic thing about power poses. This is called the Wonder Woman pose, because if you watch the 70s version of Wonder Woman, she was always standing like this. And it really projects authority and can make you feel physiologically confident, even if you're worried about what's coming up. So that's another thing you can do in addition to breathing. In gearing up for the presentation, is to, maybe do some confidence posing in front of a mirror before you go in. I think some people worry about gestures, like what if I do something weird with my hands? I always talk with my hands. I think it's fine if it's natural to you. And I think if somebody's like initially a little bit anxious and then eventually they start talking with their hands, it usually means that they've established more of a comfort level as the presentation has gone ahead. And I'm losing my train of thought. And I'm here to tell you it's not the end of the world if you lose your train of thought and maybe don't make all the points you were going to make. And it might come to me later. Okay, what about the content? So presentations are going to really vary in terms of how familiar you are off the get-go about the content. So when we do practice later, it's going to be on a topic that is just going to come very easy to everybody. And the presentations that I used to have students do was about their journey. So it shouldn't be like, oh my gosh, what if I, forget, a technical term or anything, because it's just about them. And I've also worked with classes where they're presenting on a project that they've worked on all term. So for those, it shouldn't be such a struggle. The content, shouldn't necessarily create a lot of anxiety. But if it's, very technical content that you're preparing specifically for the presentation, it's more of a thing. So I would say, either you start off familiar with what you're talking about, or you practice to the point where you are familiar with what you're talking about. And then there's no need to, read off a whole bunch of notes. There's no need to have a whole bunch of text there and to be looking at it and presenting, because you either are familiar or you've become familiar with what you're talking about. Some people will script it. I actually, now that I think of it, I had a consultation just last term where a student was practicing for a presentation and they had scripted the whole thing and memorized it. Has anyone ever done that? I think I've tried to do that and it's never really worked out very well. Carmen, did you say you've tried to do that?
I tried memorizing scripts, but it's just too hard, especially if the presentation is for like, what, 20-30 minutes. It's just really hard to memorize content.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the student I was consulting with, it was like right before the presentation. So she did not really have time to make changes. And she had, I think, mainly succeeded in memorizing it. But she was rattling it off. She was speaking too quickly. It was a monotone, because it wasn't, like, oh, this is what I'm familiar with. It's like, this is what I'm memorizing. Sometimes when we're singing in my choir, he's like, the expression on your face is like betraying that you're thinking so much about trying to remember what we're singing. And that can happen in presentations, that you're so like overwhelmed with trying to remember everything. And you just come across, like she was coming across really wooden, emotionless, way too fast, because just trying to get through it all. And this is somebody who actually remembered the whole thing. So, I gave her whatever feedback that I thought she could implement in the short time that she had. And then the next time I saw her, I asked her, how did it go? And I think she got like an okay mark, but she was someone who was used to getting excellent marks. And it's like, yeah, I kind of could have predicted that. But the worst thing that can happen if you memorize is that you forget. And maybe you don't forget like a huge thing. Maybe you just forget a sentence, like what's the thing I was going to say next? Or maybe you forget a vocabulary word or something. And what I'm saying, just go on. People might not notice, but if you're anxious and that motivates you to try to memorize and then you forget things, then that's going to fuel your anxiety. And sometimes the whole thing just falls apart, because you've forgotten like a little thing, right? So it's better to practice to the point of familiarity not have like a big note that you're sort of tempted to read off of. But you could write down a few things, like on a note card, on the screen of your phone, something like that, potentially. You could, I'd say make an outline, you know? Maybe just like put, okay, first I'm gonna talk about this, you know, a couple of words or a phrase, you know, and just sort of have on your Post-it note, on your palm of your hand, like, you know, maybe 5 points in order. The other thing you could maybe write down is if there's a vocabulary word you struggled with, if there's a statistical figure, although mind you, this, you know, a number maybe could be on the screen and you could just, you know, briefly look at it. I think, you know, it's okay to kind of briefly look at the screen and look back, but you don't want to be like reading like this or reading like this. But, you know, yeah, you can take a note of, you know, some selective things. And if you get nervous and you're like, what was the next part of my presentation? You could either look at your slide, oh yeah, I'm talking about this next, or you could look down in your outlines, like, yeah, okay, you have a word there, but you're not looking, like you're actually making the eye contact with people and, you know, and not hiding your face in your notes. Presentations tend to follow a certain structure. If they don't follow a certain structure, probably you're going to be losing people. They're like, what are you talking about now? It varies depending on what the assignment is, the length of the presentation. You know, it might not always be exactly the same structure. But I think a lot of what you're going to be doing for school presentations are similar to essays. It's like it has an intro, you know, you sort of lay out what you're going to talk about. And then it has the body, what you're going to be talking about. And then it has a conclusion, which is maybe a bit of a summary at the end, or, you know, call to action or question at the end. What did you get out of this kind of thing? There's a picture of a fishhook here because we recommend having a hook at the beginning, you know, something that's going to draw people in. Can anyone give an example of what a hook might be? Like if you think about presentations you've seen, something that, you know, just engages you right from the start.
A personal story,
Yeah,
like you shared at the beginning of this presentation.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, just to be relatable, you know, to establish that, yeah, I've been there, you know, and if I can be at a point where I can present like this, even though I know I'm imperfect and I say all the time, then so can you. Not all content is going to be as relatable like that. What might be another example of a hook?
Joke, maybe.
Maybe a joke, yeah, like that comic that was up there, possibly. Anything else? Maybe a question?
Maybe to share with them some interesting facts.
Yeah, did you know that public speaking was #1 on this survey of all phobias? Yeah, okay. So a little bit more about how you're presenting your content. And actually, I think things that could be hooks could also be interspersed in order to engage the audience. And also I would add activities there, you know, like that breathing activity. Could be, you know, part of it to engage the audience. And, you know, I kind of like stories. I presented in urban studies. This is actually based on a presentation I gave in an urban studies class recently. And they'd been working on their project. It was something related to like building a livable city. And the professor was really emphasizing that he wanted people to present it kind of in a narrative way, like, let me tell you the story about a livable city. You know, this is what I noticed in the city. This is how I got the idea to do this differently. You know, this is, you know, I've researched a few places where it's done this way, and this is what's happened. And, you know, and it's pretty engaging, like when you're kind of speaking from your experience, even though like objectively they could, you know, they could be like, you know, the urban planning tool of blah, blah, blah is blah, 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 blah. but instead they're talking about like how they discovered it, how other people have experienced it, that kind of thing. Everybody loves stories. Remember the bedtime stories when you were a kid? Okay, now here's the actual practice slide. And you know, that's kind of a gimme, right? That we know that we need to practice. I think sometimes, you know, students are human. Sometimes you just finished writing it up like an hour before the presentation is supposed to be happening. You don't have that much practice time. But ideally, it would be great if you could practice a number of times. And there are a number of things that you're looking for each time you practice. So we already talked about, you know, looking for how you're delivering it, you know, getting feedback on your voice, your posture, like all that stuff. But also there's the timing. So almost always you have some time that you're given in a class, and like maybe there's 3 people that are going to be presenting in that class, and you really have to stick to your time. A lot of times people don't time themselves when they're practicing. And I have to confess, I didn't have time to time myself when I was practicing this. So I see I have 5 minutes left for the content. But yeah, but you know, ideally you are timing yourself. And if it's a group project, you've timed yourself. So you're like, okay, we have 5 minutes total. We've agreed that I get 2 minutes of that. And my partners each get 1.5. So I'm going to time myself for 2 minutes, but it's not going to stop there because you have to like deliver it together and make sure that it adds up to 5 minutes because, you know, maybe your partners have strayed. Maybe, you know, everybody's like when they time themselves individually, it adds up to 5 minutes, but once they get together, there's a bit of a different dynamic. You know, so that's a very important thing to try to stick to. And I am trying to stick to it. I think I'm actually going to be pretty close. Another thing is, well, I think it's going to be on another slide. Yes, on this slide, practice for questions. If it's a presentation where people are permitted to ask questions, maybe yours isn't in a class, you probably want to practice handling questions. So I think, you know, for some people, and I think it's been the case with me sometimes, is the fear of having questions can be the most nerve-wracking thing about presenting. I see some nods. Yeah, so what is scary about questions? Do you mind sharing?
You can't plan for them.
But you can plan for them. It's kind of like you don't know what you're going to get, but you know, it's like an exam, right? Like you don't exactly know what you're going to get on an exam, but you can probably get a pretty decent idea. So, you know, you have your presentation and you can think like, okay, logically, if I heard this, what questions might arise in my mind? You know, so you could brainstorm that. If there's material that you cut out for length, it could be that somebody will ask about that. Like I said to Carmen, you know, I didn't have time to cover group presentations. I think people might ask about group presentations. Yeah, and then also if you practice in front of somebody else, you can ask them to ask you some questions so you can anticipate. You know, and anytime I've presented this in a class, the professor has always said, we are not going to ask you questions to try to trip you up. You know, we are going to ask you logical questions that are relevant. And then I've said to the professor, well, what if the student doesn't know the answer to the question? What if they say, I don't know? I mean, are they going to get a bad grade? And the professor's like, no, you know, like, you know, they're not expected to sort of know everything. So I think if there is something you don't know, rather than, you know, just kind of making something up that you could get caught in, admit to not knowing. Now, depending on the level of academia that you're at, because I was talking to somebody who did presentations in a master's program, and he said, instead of saying, I don't know, you can say that was not within the scope of my project, or that might be a good future direction for research, you know, but it's the same as saying, I don't know. The other thing you could do if it's, you know, a class where maybe it's something that you're kind of expected to know, you know, or would count in your favor if you did know that, you know, and you're coming back next week to that class, you can say, I am going to research that and I will get you the answer next week. You know, that's another thing. So yeah, the questions, they can be prepared for. I mean, they can't be 100% prepared for, but what can in life? Okay, so hey, we're on time, yay. So this is a summary of the different tips. We didn't talk explicitly about slides, but I think these slides are a fairly good model. Does anyone have any other tips they want to share or like a burning question at this point?
I think something I can probably share is that with any presentation, if you're standing up front and presenting, the tendency is to go too fast and to talk too fast. So slowing down and leaving pauses between your sentences is a really good tip. And I'm sure the Toastmaster folks can kind of attest to that. And just talking slowly and more intentionally would be a good tip.
I have one because I just remembered the point that I lost before.
Awesome.
Yay. So it's about, breath being important in everything. And sometimes it can be awkward, to be like in front of people if you feel like you need to take a breath. But I mean, it's okay to take a bit of a pause. And I've got glasses on, so maybe I have a cloth. Maybe I'm going to clean my glasses for a minute. And that's not as awkward as I'm just pausing explicitly to take a breath. Or maybe you have a glass of water and you take a moment to take a sip from the glass of water. That can buy you some time to ground you again and get you to slow down.
Got a tip for volume, especially if we're speaking in like larger rooms where there's lots of people, is think about speaking so that the person who's furthest from you can hear. So think about that person as your volume meter. And it's also like an accessibility issue, right? Like if you're up there sharing something, you want people to be able to hear what you're saying. So give yourself the permission to speak loud enough for the person farthest away to hear you. Yeah.
And I guess another thing is you're usually not in a room of complete strangers. If it's a class, maybe there's somebody you've connected with in the class, or maybe a TA that you find really supportive. So maybe focusing on that person, like making general eye contact, but looking at that person for reassurance. And these are my lovely, safe people, and so is Neela. All right, we're going to do practice. And before I guide the in-person people through practice, we're going to turn off the main Zoom. And Aiden's going to go to another room with the Zoom to take the people on Zoom through a practice session separately.